Shabbat Tov. It's really an honor and privilege to be at this incredible occasion. On so many levels, it's an amazing privilege for me to be here, because I think there's so much teshuvah happening, so much HaShiveinu on so many different levels. Of course, the occasion of HaShiveinu Hashem Elecha, that we're about to say Selichot, and we're going to, as the Rav so beautifully said, to enforce and to reinforce the concept of returning. This is the time that we really begin. Obviously, we began from Rosh Chodesh Elul, but particularly now for the Ashkenazim, where we begin to say Selichot in the time of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and so many other returnings in this particular occasion of the HaShiveinu minyan. So firstly, B'reshut Harav Avi Kanai, which I'd heard of but not met formally. It's very nice to meet you, Rav Kanai, and to hear your beautiful Divrei Torah in Hebrew and in English. I was very impressed with the English. You said that you didn't grow up in an English-speaking family, but your father, mathematician, went a number of times on sabbatical, so in grade 4 and, what grade was it?
3K, 4th, and 10th.
Very impressive, very impressive. And then you went as a Rosh Kollel, so Bemet, unbelievable English as well as Shakwach. And B'reshut, this really wonderful community. I have many friends in the community. Just met the Barnetts again, our friends Rafi and Dina, and many other South Africans and people who we know. And I was privileged to be invited by my friend Mark now, Shlomo Samovitz. Shubidub Shlomi is a legend in South Africa. Absolutely, kids, we all grew up in Shubidub Shlomi. And many other friends in the community. It's an honor and privilege to be with you. Rav Katzin, I just reconnect with my friend Rav Katzin, who work together, and I know your son, I believe, is in the community and does, Rav Katzin, so much wonderful work in America in general, but the Russian community in particular. So we work together and look forward to working together very more. And really what I want to say is the following, is that the essence of life is teshuvah. You couldn't have picked a better word. That's the name of the minyan, HaShiveinu. Just unbelievable. They met not only for this time, but the essence of all of our lives in one word. I often think, if I had to say in one word, what is life about? What is Judaism about? There are a number of one words which come to mind, but one of them would be teshuvah. If I had to pick the top 5 words that in one word, what's the essence of what it means to be on this earth? Teshuvah. Rav Kook writes in the beginning of Orot HaTeshuvah that the one concept that preoccupied him, Yomam V'Layla, that he could not escape from, was teshuvah. Everything about life is teshuvah. He said, I wanted to write a book about teshuvah, but what could I write that hadn't already been written? So many people greater than me have written about teshuvah. What could I possibly write? But he felt I actually had to write, because there's a teshuvah in our generation, he says, which is different from other teshuvot. And therefore there has to be teshuvah. I believe it was mentioned, as Rav Katzin's son, somebody mentioned to me that it was said that the minyan this morning is not only HaShiveinu Hashem Elecha, but teshuvah, it's also Chadesh Yameinu Kekerim. The essence of teshuvah has to be itchadshut. Teshuvah is not returning to the same place that you were below itchadshut. It has to have an element of itchadshut. And Rav Kook writes, he says, in the generation of the return to Eretz Yisrael, there has to be a new interpretation of teshuvah. Teshuvah is not only HaShiveinu Hashem Elecha, it's Chadesh Yameinu Kekerim. Part of the essence of teshuvah is itchadshut. Ein Beit Midrash below chidush. If you're learning in a Beit Midrash, there's no chidush, it's not Torah, it's something else. The essence of it, and it's a stira, because it has to be that we ne'eman to the Masorot. It has to be that our Torah is the Torah we received at Har Sinai, and it's Masorot Yisrael Saba, and we don't change anything. But at the same time, it has to be a Torah which is mitchadesh, because no person is ever the same as they were yesterday. Ein tefillah below chidush. If a person is davening the same tefillah that they did today, that they're doing for mincha and mariv, then that's not a tefillah. That's just diklum, as we're saying. You're just saying something which is written. If you're not changing and nothing about, you got no new bakasha from shachrit to mincha, nothing happened. That's why I always have the problem of davening mincha mariv so soon after the other, because sometimes you have to, ein brera, otherwise you're going to miss it later. But I try not to, because what am I going to say that I didn't feel 10 seconds before? Or maybe you've got, but there is still. Maybe I didn't already have got teshuvah to, I didn't say the shema correctly something happened in those 5, but it's harder. But it cannot be that in the 3 prakim of your life, shachrit, mincha, mariv, morning, afternoon, and evening, you didn't change in any way, nothing. You don't appreciate anything that you didn't appreciate before, and you don't need anything that you didn't need. Nothing in your life has changed. Our life is totally revolved around bakashot v'hodaot. We're always feeling grateful, we should be, or feeling lacking. I, by the way, struggle with this, because when you're feeling grateful, you feel you're grateful, you've got everything you need. And in the same vein, but I don't, I have bakashot. How can I in the Amidah every day go from bakasha to hoda'ah? I find it difficult. But I've realized that life is challenging. All of life is tirot. Every element of life, the older I get, and I'm still very young, I just recently turned 50. It took me a long time to admit that I was 50. I'm 51 now. It took me, I couldn't say I'm sure I look to you like I'm 40 or you, and I look very, very young. But when I turned 40, I felt like I was so accomplished. I was a community rabbi in South Africa and head of Mizrachi, and that's where I met Shlomo. But when I got closer to 50, wow, I struggled with it. Thank you for, it's all part of my therapy. I keep talking about it and feel better about it. But Be'emet, in life, and now I've actually interrupted what I was even saying. Why did I even talk about my age, Mark? Now you've got to help me. I don't even know where I was going with that. But I wanted to say that, no, what was I saying? I interrupted myself. Azoi, Shachrit Mincha Mariv. Bakashot, there you go. Now, there we go. The older I get, the more I realize life is about finding a balance. It's about living with ongoing stirot, non-stop stirot. I'm going to talk about one of them a bit later. I believe I've got after another song, I'm going to say a different idea. Another stira that I've tried to be a meyoshev in my life, which I think is the essence of also what our mission in the world is. Life is about living with contradictions. One of those contradictions is feeling I have absolutely everything that I need and I'm absolutely grateful with everything. And in the same vein saying, but chaser li kol kach, 13 bakashot, 12, every time, chaser li in physically, chaser li emotionally, chaser li spiritually, and then, but Baruch Hashem, I've got everything that I need. That's the essence of Chadesh Yameinu Kekerem. The essence of teshuvah is returning to a place which you've always been, where there's no chidush, where you're just continuing the tradition of, we're a thousands of year tradition, but at the same time be mitchadesh. And this is Rav Kook. I've got nothing to say about teshuvah, what hasn't been said. But on the other hand, I have to say something because I feel a chidush. And for me, one of the greatest chidushim in teshuvah is what we're going to see next week's parsha, this coming week in Nitzavim. How incredibly, and the first person that I saw which said this, and you might not have all heard of this individual, and even if you've heard of him, you might not have learned his works. His name is Rav Yehuda El-Kalai. Rav Yehuda El-Kalai was an unbelievable leader of Sarajevo, was the chief rabbi of Sarajevo, and he was one of the first, him along with Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kailisher, one from the Sephardi world and one from the Ashkenazi world, the Talmud Rabbi Akiva Eiger, two Gdolei Olam in the 1840s, which both then believed that the time is to work proactively for the Jewish people to return to Eretz Yisrael. This is before Zionism, it's before Chibat Zion. Chibat Zion movement, Chuvei Tzion, was only founded in the 1880s, and Zionism was in 1897. In the 1840s, mainly after the blood libel of Damascus, both of them write, the blood libel in Damascus changed for both of them, an anti-Semitic act where they couldn't believe, again, people talking about blood libels, and this time it's in Damascus and not in Europe, and anti-Semitism keeps reinventing itself in different surot. And they both felt then in 1840, he writes in his book Minchat Yehuda, and Rav Tzvi Kalish in Drishat Zion at a similar time says, we now have to be working, even though there are only 6,000 Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael at the time, 6,000 Jews. We have to now start working towards bringing the Jewish people back to the land in practical terms. And in his book, it's actually interesting, Rav Yehuda Raphael, who put all of his writings together, puts on the top what I wanted to talk about, literally in a line about his writings. He says as follows, and this is the first time I'd noticed in the Psukim, but I hadn't seen somebody write it explicitly. And subsequently, Rav Kook wrote a very similar thing in Orot Teshuvah, and also Rav Yisachar Shlomo titled Ema Banim Smecha. They say that if you look at the source of teshuvah in the Torah, it is always interrelated with returning to Eretz Yisrael. The two go together. HaShiveinu Hashem Eilecha v'nashuvah is both, says Rav Al-Kalai, a personal tshuva, the typical tshuva, the historic tshuva, the individual, as the Rambam says. What's the source of tshuva? The Rambam says both in Sefer HaMitzvot and in Mishneh Torah. It's the vidui, that the individual has to mitvadeh al avonot shelo, an individual has to return to Hashem. But says Rav Al-Kalai, that's one type of teshuvah. That's the individual needing to return in his or her personal life. But he says the pshat, where the word teshuvah appears, and by the way, the Sefer Mitzvat Katan and the Ramban both see the source of teshuvah not in vidui. That's a detail of the teshuvah, a very important detail, but it's not the source of teshuvah. The source of teshuvah, according to the Ramban and according to the Sefer Mitzvat Katan, is in this week's parsha, which Rav Al-Kalai expands on. 7 or 8 times we're going to read about in 10 psukim, Vayak yavo alecha kol advarim haele, when you're going to return to the right, and all these things. V'hashevot alevavecha b'chol hagoyim asher yidacha Hashem shama. V'shavta ad Hashem elokecha v'shamata b'kolo. You'll return to Hashem, and in the very next verse, V'shav Hashem elokecha et shvutcha v'richamcha v'shav v'kibetzcha. Says Rav Alka, I don't understand. You're talking about kibbutz galuyot, and you're talking about the individual teshuvah. Mikan ali lomed, he says in a few places in his writings, you see teshuvah has a double meaning. The individual returning to Hashem, and Am Yisrael returning to Eretz Yisrael, and it's interchangeable in the pshat. The kibbutz galuyot is not only called kibbutz galuyot, it's called teshuvah. V'shav Hashem lokecha et shvutcha v'richamcha v'shav. How many times can you say the word teshuvah in one line? V'shav Hashem lokecha et shvutcha v'richamcha v'shav v'kibetzcha mikol ha'avim v'im yen nidachacha b'ktzei hashamayim misham yikabetzcha. You see, kibbutz galuyot, geula, and teshuvah are all interchangeable. And therefore, the big chiddush, when I saw this, it's in the pshat, but he says, you see, you cannot separate HaShiveinu Hashem Eilecha as an individual striving to be close to Hashem, and from the Jewish people striving to return to Eretz Yisrael. There are two teshuvot which are interlinked one to the other. And says Rav Kook, the reason I feel that I need to write about in the door of kibbutz galuyot is because now that we are being mekayem as an am, the kibbutz klalit, teshuvah klalit, the beginning of V'shavta ad Hashem elokecha, maybe our interpretation of the individual teshuvah can also have some type of chidush, because these two teshuvot are working together. One idea that I speak about so often is that there are only two things in the Torah which are called a morasha. There's only two things in the Torah which are called a morasha, which are an inheritance for every Jew. There's only two things that each and every Jewess individually owns spiritually. And what are those two things? A morasha, an active inheritance, Torah and Eretz Yisrael. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha kilat Yaakov. And the fifth lashon of Geula in Parashat Vayera, what does it say? Ve'eveti v'hotzeti v'chulei v'itzalti v'lakachti v'galti v'lakachti ve'eveti etchem el haaretz asher nasati et yadi latet ota la'Avram l'Yitzchak li'Yaakov v'natati ota lachem morasha ni Hashem. I couldn't believe it. Only two things in the Torah. Two things are called a morasha. But when I was working with my own, I come from a very Zionistic family. I come from a family where from the day I grew up, Zionism was part of our family. My grandparents on my father's side made Aliyah from Morocco. My name Perez. I'm Bavanotai Rabbi Ma'akip Minak Ashkenaz. I grew up as an Ashkenazi, so I've got a lot of teshuvah still to do. The Sfarim still haven't forgiven me, whatever. So I grew up as an Ashkenazi. It's a whole story. I don't want to tell you about it now because we're talking about other things, but I grew up, on the Moroccan side, they made Aliyah in the 1950s. But my father, who made his way to South Africa in the 1960s, met my mother, who's like most South Africans, her parents are Lithuanian, from Kovna, my parents. And I grew up, Sephardi father, Ashkenazi mother, but I grew up Ashkenazi. Ba'avnotai harabim. I'm just saying it, let's say today, Chova. So that there shouldn't be a taina, because I still got taina. Perez, Zeh Perez, what type of Perez are you? But so that's how I grew up in South Africa. And on my father's side, I grew up with grandparents in Israel. And then in 1979, when I was 9 years old, another amazing thing happened. My Ashkenazi grandparents told us that they're making Aliyah. What? Since when do grandparents leave children and grandchildren behind? Isn't that the other way around? Isn't the grandparents normally running after the parents? And my grandparents, who were not really that traditional South Africans, said, he said, my entire life I've been a revisionist, been in Beitar. He founded, my grandfather he built Maccabi South Africa. I come from a very sporty family. We all play sport. Sport is also in our blood. We grew up in a family of sportsmen and sportswomen. And my grandfather built Jewish sport in South Africa. Then we called him Mr. Maccabi. Mr. Maccabi. It's actually his yahrzeit tomorrow evening. He passed away 4 years ago at the age of 97. He's buried in Kfar Haroeh with my grandmother, who also passed away 3.5 years ago. They were married for 75 years. And they made Aliyah at the age of 59 and 60, where they told their children and grandchildren, the reason we're making Aliyah is we are Zionists. And we believe we need to make Aliyah. And we've got the dilemma, but we've got children and grandchildren in South Africa. We hope and pray that you will follow suit, because the place that we need to be as Zionist leaders is in Israel. So I came with so I grew up with Moroccan grandparents in Israel, and my Ashkenazi grandparents making Aliyah when I was 9. What choice did I have? But the choice that I did have for me was to try and see how much for me is tzionut part of Torah. And the more I studied, I couldn't believe. wherever you go. Wherever you go. As I started on this journey, I say, Avraham, the first thing Hashem says to Avraham, you don't say, Boker Tov, I'm God. Say, Lech lecha me'artzecha. Good morning. How about a little bit of Shmiras Shabbos? Before I talk to you, I want you to know that your destiny of you and your people is connected to somewhere else. Just keep walking and I'll tell you when to stop. Why? We'll work it out along the way. The Jewish people have a journey to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Doron Perez has written that in Tanakh there's two journeys always going on. There's a journey of the Jewish people to Har Sinai, HaShiveinu Hashem Elecha v'Nashuvah, returning to Torah, to Hashem, to Itgalut, and to Har Moriah, where the Torah, there's no Kedusha at Har Sinai. You go to Har Sinai, we don't know where Har Sinai is today. Is it in where they say it is, where there's the Saint Katarina? The Jews aren't looking for, because there's no Kedusha there. The Kedusha is where the Torah got planted, in where? Har HaMoriah in Yerushalayim. The Torah is not the Torah of Sinai, which is along the way, in the middle of a desert. That Hashem doesn't want us to be in the middle of a desert. Hashem chose the place of the resting place of the Torah to be in the middle of a city, the capital city, which is the city of the Mikdash, which is the basis of the Sanhedrin. That's where the Torah is. It's in the middle of life, teeming with life. And therefore there's an ongoing journey of the Jewish people to Har Sinai, HaShiveinu Hashem Elecha, and Har Moriah, to Eretz Yisrael. And the two are interlinked. And Rav Alkalai says when you look at the Pshat, they're interlinked. Teshuvah is connected to the individual teshuvah and the teshuvah of the Jewish people. Rav Kook develops the idea further. Rav Yisachar Shlomo Takl also says the same thing in a different way. Rav Kook says it's not only about individual teshuvah, and it's not that individual teshuvah is the individual to Hashem and the Jewish people returning to Eretz Yisrael, but also interchangeable. He has not only individual and klali teshuvah, but also the Jewish people as a people have to undergo teshuvah to Eretz Yisrael, physical teshuvah, and teshuvah to the Torah, returning to our roots. So therefore, I don't think you could have picked a better name of HaShiveinu, not only because of this tkufa of now about to come to Selichot and launching HaShiveinu on the night of HaShiveinu Hashem Elecha v'Nashuvah, but also because these are the two great returnings of the Jewish people in our generation, returning to Eretz Yisrael and returning to Hashem and the Torah, and they are not easy. They are not easy. I know that this minyan didn't come about easily. It's not easy. There's different generations, there's different cultures, Israelis, Chutznikim. Sometimes it's easier to say, you know what, let me compromise on my kesher to Eretz Yisrael, or let's call it the appreciation of Eretz Yisrael in our generation, which is Medinat Yisrael, which is also murkav, it's complicated, but it requires tremendous appreciation. It's a lot easier to say, let's leave the whole state of Israel thing and just focus on Eretz Yisrael. It's easier to do that. You lose the complexity. Or it's easier to, so you say, you know what, let's leave the Medinat Yisrael and just focus on Eretz Yisrael. Let's focus only on HaShiveinu Hashem in the individual personal sense. But I know that what's at the heart of this minyan is people who want to have both teshuvahs interlinked. A deep sense of a kesher to Torah, to community, to Hashem, to ongoing growth, to Torah and Tefillah, and to feel a deep sense of appreciation of Eretz Yisrael through the prism of understanding the talich of kibbutz galuyot and appreciating what the state of Israel has done for this return. And that's, I think, been the core of the return, to be able to say, let's become part of a minyan which we feel at home in, but we need to find our place in it because there's generational gaps and people have made aliyah and wanting to find their home. And I think it's required a tremendous amount of the lovely Hebrew word that if you don't know, you have to learn it, called lahachil, hachala. It's beautiful Hebrew. There's certain words you can't really translate. Lahachil mashu. What's a good word to say, lahachil? To contain, which is so not a good word in English, but to contain something, right? Contain. Lahachil is to make space for people, to find in your space for others. Milashon kol. Sorry? Accommodate's a better word, but still accommodate is, when I hear the word accommodate, I don't feel inspired. Let me try and accommodate you. When I hear the word tzach lahachil, inspire lahachil, yesh makom lekulam, yesh makom lekulam, but it requires making space. The essence of any relationship is one thing and one thing alone: make space for other people. The whole world is space. The whole tzimtzum of space is called makom. That's why one of Hashem's name is makom. Hashem makomo shel olam ve'ena olam makomo. Hashem is makom. And what was the biggest challenge, so to speak, for Hashem is to make place for others. That's tzimtzum. There's no place. In Hashem's light, nothing else can exist. But the whole yesod of creation is tzimtzum. Hashem is everything. But Gam Hashem can be mechil, can make place for everything. But He is everything. Another step. How can the everything make place? He is everything. Yes, that somehow make yourself, however, it's Kabbalistic concepts we don't fully understand, make yourself smaller to make place for other. Ki'ilu, to teach us that all relationships are about making place and space for others. That's the yesod of every relationship. And I think what Mitzpe Ramot has done here with HaShiveinu is everybody finding their own space. And it comes with challenges. But that's the essence of what relationships are about. And that's the essence of being mechil in this community. The ability to bring in younger people and have a deep kesher, to develop their kesher to Torah, but not, and in the process to community and to Eretz Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael. And those two teshuvot are the pshat of teshuvah. It's what brings these two together. There's a lot more to say about it, but I'll stop here and just say what a zchut it is for this community to have been mechil, this HaShiveinu, in the time of HaShiveinu, in the epoch and generation of HaShiveinu, Hashem Elecha, to returning to Eretz Yisrael, returning to Hashem, finding the way for them all to work together, to work it out in the details. What an unbelievable expression and of the yesodot of teshuvah. Shenizkeh v'shetizku. One further thought. What I'm going to share now is the thing I probably feel most strongly about. I read once in Rabbi Twersky's one of Rabbi Twersky, Abraham Twersky's books. It was his 38th book that he'd written. And I never forget what he wrote in his introduction. He said, I've written the same thing in 38 different ways. Everybody's got his Hu Haya Omer. We know that Pirkei Avot Hu Haya Omer. He doesn't just say that. That's what that person believed. And maximum that each individual, Hillel Hazaken maybe has 3 or 4 Mishnayot in his name. There's only a few Hu Haya Omers. That's what they really, really believed. So I want to share Hu Haya Omer. For me, it's something that I find myself wherever I go, I speak about it. I've got so many source sheets on it, and it's one of those things that I feel so passionate about. And incredibly, I found that the Zohar says exactly that this is what the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are about. Rosh Hashanah is the only Chag in Israel that is 2 days. It's weird. It's only Chag. And I heard this idea that the connection to Rosh Hashanah from the Rebbe of Shpinka, one of the Chatzer Hasidim, came to our yeshiva and spoke. Then I found the exact same thing in the Siftei Chaim of Rav Chaim Friedlander, one of the great Balei Musar, the yeshiva world, and a very similar thing of Rav Dessler in Michtav Meliyahu about Rosh Hashanah. But I want to share an idea that for me it goes to the core of what life is about. I first got this idea when I read one of Rav Soloveitchik's article called Selichot in Yemei Zikaron. He's got a long article called Selichot, how our life has to be a life of Selichot. In one word, what is our life about? We Shlichim. All of us. All of us, our neshamas were sent to this earth for a Selichot. I always think to myself, if I had 1 minute of Hashem's time, if He came to me in the middle of the night and said to me, okay, Doron ben Chaim, why are you Ashkenazi and not Sephardi? No, he's not going to say that to me. I just want to ask a shaila. I asked Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg what I should do as I taught in our yeshiva. He said, Doron, ani posek shta Ashkenazi. Why? He said, your parents, he asked me if there was a Sephardi shul in South Africa. I said, there was one. He said, could your parents have taken me there? Did they not? Did they bring you up as an Ashkenazi? Ani posek shta Ashkenazi, lo tzur chatarat nedarim. I haven't met one Sephardi Rebbe who agrees with that. But just that Rav Zalman Nechemia Paskin. So no, that's not my question. The one question is, am I fulfilling my mission on earth? Hashem, is this what you sent me here for? Every neshama is different. Every neshama has a shlichut. Every person has their shlichut. How do you know if you're doing your shlichut? And incredibly, all of us are judged not once on Rosh Hashanah, but twice. The Zohar says in Parashat Pinchas, we all know the technical reason why there are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. We all know. It's the only Chag, of course, which is on Rosh Chodesh. So there was a safek with Kiddush HaChodesh. So technically speaking, we didn't know exactly when it was. So there's a clear technical halachic reason why Rosh Hashanah, being the only Chag which falls on Rosh Chodesh, even in Israel, has to be 2 days. It's a safek. Even though we've got a calendar, that's how it is. We know that. But is there a more spiritual reason why it is that Klal Yisrael, the Dorotei now for almost 2 millennia, have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, that the safek, in Israel even there's 2 days? Unbelievably, the Zohar says as follows in Parashat Pinchas. Ela hani trei yomin de Rosh Hashanah, amai trei yomin, begin de inun trei beidina. You face two batei din, two very different judgments. You can succeed in the one and fail in the other. And life, as I say, is always contradictions and stirot. Every person is judged twice. You can get 100% for the one and very little for the other, or the other way around. One's called De'ihu Dina Kashya, a difficult din, and the other one Dina Rafia. And the Siftei Chaim and Rav Dessler, and they're all trying to work out why are there two judgments, and why is one difficult and one a little bit easier? And says the Siftei Chaim as follows, as what the Rebbe Shpinka said, and for me it goes down to the essence of what life is about. If I had to close my eyes and say to myself, what is my shlichut in life and what's everybody's shlichut? Everyone is sent to this earth for two tikkunim, for two shlichuyot. Tikkun atzmi, the Balei Musar talk more than anything about tikkun atzmi. A person is sent to this world to mataken themselves. And tikkun olam. We don't end one davening without Alein al kain kavel tekain olam b'malchut shakai. You don't finish a tefillah to say you're not only here for your own tikkun. Is the world better for you having been here? And they're two very difficult tikkunim. The challenge, what for me was so enlightening about Rav Kook, when I've stood on Rav Kook, it's not just about me. It's not just about me. I've got a responsibility to beyond me. I started feeling, I'm a Baal Tshuva week, our family became religious in South Africa when I was about 11 years old. And as I went through Yiddishkeit, I started feeling it's quite spiritually egocentric. Is everything about my olam haba? Is that what it's about? Is everything about the fact that I can bask in Hashem's glory? Is it all about me? It just didn't resonate fully with me. Of course I need to matakein myself, but is my only mission on this world to use everyone around me in the whole world to matakein myself, that I can bask in Hashem's glory? Is it only that? I started learning Rav Kook now. There's also tikkun haklal. He wouldn't sign a letter. It was eved la'am kadosh l'admat kodesh, not only about me. But then he writes in Malach Haidot B'Yisrael, you've got to be careful that you don't lose yourself in tikkun haklal. Says Rav Kook, Shlomo HaMelech's challenge was, he was so metaken haklal that he would marry 300 wives. Why? Because each one was a princess, and every king and queen would have to come. It was the United Nations. The Jewish people were metaken like they were never before. But says Rav Kook, he lost himself in the process. He was matila small. 18 wives, I can have 300. Doesn't apply to me. Says Rav Kook in Malach Haidot L'Yisrael, you can do such a tikkun olam that you forget about tikkun haprat. But if you lose yourself in tikkun haprat, you forget about the klal. He says olam haba only became a focus. Olam haba is almost not mentioned anywhere in the whole in Nach. Wherever it's mentioned, it's a ha'ara. Where the whole world, the Nach Torah shebichtav is not about your individual tikkun only. It's about tikkun ha'olam, tikkun ha'klal. It's about the world, the klal being better. But individual Torah Shebal Peh, especially when there was no state after the second temple, it became about tikkun haprat. Says Rav Kook, you need both. It's much easier to lose yourself in the klal, or it's much easier just to focus on tikkun haprat. There's two tikkunim that need to happen. And our mission on earth is tikkun atzmi. We have to make ourselves the best we can be, even if we were the only person in the world. But we've got an unbelievable responsibility to make the world a better place, the lives of the people around us that we touch, our spouse, our children, our families, our parents, our community, our society, Klal Yisrael, the world. Is the world better for us having been here? And these are two very different missions. They are so difficult to do together because you need very different skill sets. And Nitivot Shalom says in Parashat Re'ah in the Bracha and Klala, he says, what you need for tikkun haprat is to know your weaknesses. If a person does not, and I see that as I go through my life, if you can't own up to who you are, and it's relationships which highlight them to you. I don't see my weaknesses as much in my work, which I'll come to in a minute, because in your work you work in your strengths. Tikkun haklal is about your strengths. You want to make the biggest difference in the world? Go with your passions, your talents. I find it easy to moser nefesh and to the fields that are things that I'm inspired about and passionate about, and try to use my strengths in them. Then I realize it's exactly those things which trip me up in my tikkun haprat. I'm very good at being a human doing. I find it easy to do. I'm not so good at being a human being. Just be, stop, and just be. And I've realized in relationships, if you can't be, then you can't have genuine relationship. Just be. Be in somebody's presence. Just be. What do you need to do? You don't need to do anything. Just be. Listening is about being. Very hard to listen, to genuinely listen. Stephen Covey writes in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that he gives a whole course in university. Nobody teaches you how to listen. They teach us how to talk and how to write and the 3 R's. And they teach us how to express ourselves. Bitul hayesh. Just keep quiet and just be. You don't have to give advice. You don't have to listen selectively. You don't have to say anything. Just be. It is so hard just to be. Tikkun haprat is about your weaknesses. Forget about your strengths, they only get in the way. Forget about your passions, they only trip you up. You need 2 totally different mindsets. And I see life is about just living with these, balancing all these different ideals and roles. That's the essence of life. Tikkun haprat and tikkun haklal. And says the Siftei Chaim that's why you need 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. You get judged as a prat. How well are you being metaken yourself? And you might get 100%. But is it only about you? Is your life only about you and your olam haba? Is that what your life is about? Or is your life about, are the people around you's lives enriched? And how are you changing, not them because you can't change anybody, how are you feeling a sense of wanting to make a difference in the lives of others, to be there for other people? In all the relationships around you, in your community, in your people, are you moser nefesh for things bigger than yourself? You might get 10 out of 10 for tikkun haprat and very little for tikkun haklal. You might do brilliantly in tikkun haklal and very little in tikkun haprat. In the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I saw the Covey writes there that Dag Hammarskjöld, who was one of the Director Generals of the United Nations many, many years ago, wrote, he said, I find it much easier to labor for the poverty-stricken of Africa and to be there for the millions of people than to be a good spouse. It's so much easier to lose yourself in your Mesirat Nefesh. It is so easy if you have that bent. You moister nefesh for everybody. But are you that generous with the people closest to you? They're very different skills. Tikkun olam, tikkun haprat. Dina rafia and dina kashya. What's the dina kashya? Where there's nowhere to hide, where you stand before Hashem, just you. Just you. That's your individual judgment. The dina rafia is because you stand before what you've done for the klal, you've also got the protection of the klal. The Kuzari says, why is it better to daven in a minyan, even though sometimes it's easier to daven on your own? Because when you daven on your own, it's only your tefillot. Every time you slip up, there's nothing to protect you. When you daven in a klal, so you didn't concentrate, but you know what? Other people concentrate at that moment. The tefillah of the klal goes up together. Your dina rafia is because when you talk about your contribution to the klal, you've got the zchut of the klal. It's not just you. There's other people. Everyone's part of the klal. And maybe there's so much more to say about this, but the yesod is tikkun olam v'tikkun atzmi. To be metakein yourself and to be metakein olam. And these are often a stira. They're often a stira because it's so easy to focus on yourself and forget about others. And sometimes you have to focus on yourself. Otherwise, how are you going to metakein yourself? But then you push off other roles. You can't. Then you have to play a role in the klal. And I personally find it difficult when I'm more serious for the klal. Okay, how do you stop and say, okay, create all types of spaces? Everyone has their challenges, and may we all, Bezrat Hashem, be able to be human doings and human beings. The problem in the Western world is human havings. It's all about what you have. That's the problem. Generally, is the whole thing of affluenza. People feel a sense of self by what they have. Maybe Corona's calmed everyone down a little bit and said, you know what, just look at what you really have. So much can get taken away from you. So many experiences and so many travels, it can all get taken away. What do you really have? You only really have 2 marashot. Torah and Eretz Yisrael, the Torah tells us that. You only have 2 teshuvot, returning as a people to Hashem, to the klal, to the prat. And may we all of us, Bezrat Hashem, in the spirit of HaShiveinu, in this amazing HaShiveinu minyan, at this time of HaShiveinu, with bringing all these teshuvot together, as we stand before Hashem on the 2 dinim of Trei Bei Dinai, may we all, B'ofen Amok, have a chazara, b'teshuvah, b'prat, to be the best we can be and aspire to be the best we can be, and also in the klal, to be able to want to be moser nefesh for others, to make the biggest difference we can to the world around us, for our lives and the lives of others being enriched, for us having been here. Shavua Tov, Shana Tova, and Shenizke Kulanu LaHaShiveinu, Shevelecha v'Nashuva, Chadesh Yameinu K'Kerem. Thank you, Baruch.